Welcome to another Secular Saturday sermon. This time I'm going to talk about something autobiographical in an attempt to make a point. It'll also conveniently, just in case you're curious, let you know a little more about me and I guess what has influenced me to be able to be the unconventional thinker and speaker and actor that I am, but it is left open in the sense that I will be talking about myself. I'll have kind of a point to it. I'm not going to necessarily want to go over to the point where I'm just talking about myself and just to like get to know me kind of way. And yet I don't want to go all the way over to where I'm just making a point and I'm making myself almost sound, inhuman or like some mechanical fake representation of a person. And sometimes I think when we use illustrations from our own life, and we can want to feel self-important and sort of objectify our story to the point where it's gone beyond willingness to objectify our story, and it's gone into this territory where we almost come across like we're trying to make the point that our story is somehow godlike, that it is sort of a representation of principles in the universe or whatever, literally, rather than just being our background and an illustration, especially for us, but to anyone that is curious and wants to listen to our story a little bit, at least, just an illustration of whatever it is we're trying to show or explore even. And so I want to of course try to stay grounded and not get distracted by making myself sound so my story sounds so objectified that it's like as if it makes me too authoritative and inhuman. But I will kind of tell a piece of it, and I'm going to tell it in the form that I guess I won't introduce. I'll just do it. But a piece of my story has to do with me around college age, let's just say, right, and centered around the years where you would be, becoming an adult, sort of a coming of age story in the sense of like the expectations of but I mean the expectations placed on you as a new adult, 18 in my culture, and going to college and wondering what you're really going to do and wondering how people are going to see you and trying to mesh all that in to some sense of a beginning of a career supposedly, or at least your first real kind of steps in life and that whole sense of things. So here's my story, or what I want to tell from my story at that age. And I'll tell it like this. I did not mean to, but I asked questions that I could not find people to understand. And it wasn't simply a lack of answers to the questions, like, oh, I don't have an answer to your question, right? Maybe you should go consult someone else, or I won't explore the other possibilities, but there's other possibilities there as well, but maybe you should go consult someone else, let's say. It wasn't that, it was as if, my questions themselves weren't being understood. And some of that is just like, hey, in retrospect, some of that I think was, of course, the normal sort of youthfulness and this ability to sometimes get in your own head and just sort of express something that makes sense to you and then not really get how it might come across or how you might bridge the gap between you and other people, or even sometimes not quite getting the fundamental respect that you should have for other people, let's be honest, when you're still a little young, on the young side. Sure, some of that might have been that, but even in retrospect, there was a whole other thing going on. Maybe more so in retrospect because I can say it with more experience and say, well, this definitely happened, There was another thing going on, and it was this, as if my questions just fundamentally were just not able to be processed, right, by people. And these are questions that I, because of my story going back earlier, because of my, what you could say, call low self-esteem, but it might be more accurately represented in the psychological term, a negative self-regard rather than a positive self-regard, because it was that. It wasn't just a low, it wasn't something that I was kind of low on, which is what is implied sometimes when you say low self-esteem, but it was something where I actually pretty much negatively regarded myself. And one of the key ways that I did that is by looking at myself and my ability to inquire about things and discover things and be curious and intellectual and ask questions that are really just trying to dig down into something and be insightful and make an impact, though, not just so that I can be a nerd, but actually, I want to do something in the end. I sort of learned to stifle all that at a very young age, very young, astoundingly young. It amazes me. My first memories were, I was already doing that. So, that very beginning of a personality that's happening when you're a toddler, 2 or 3 years old, my first memories that I can anchor in anything, I think, are from when I was 3. So by that time, I was already doing this to myself, kind of stifling myself and holding myself back and not telling people who I was. And the way in which I was doing that is I wasn't really asking my questions. I wasn't even starting with that. I wasn't really uncovering my questions. I wasn't divulging what I honestly thought about things because I wasn't asking my questions. Well, so fast forward to 17, 18, I was going, I can't handle being like that anymore. For the first time, I was kind of starting to unlock that cage that I had built around my, real self. And so I'm asking my questions, and then I'm finding out that when I'm letting them out, people can't understand what the heck I'm talking about. So I'm like, okay, maybe I need to, try to find a different audience. Maybe I need to find somebody that has a reputation of being more intellectual. Maybe I need to find somebody that's a specialist in this or that field. Maybe I need to, so I tried all these things, all these experiments that I would do through the at least a year or two after that age, and I found that for the most part it didn't work, and I was still running into this sense that my deepest questions, my most honest questions, really were not being understood by others for the most part. And so that's the kind of the setup. And what happened with that is that it's like I went into uncovering the limits of people's empathy when they would run out of the patience for my questions. So, right, if they come to the end of their rope, so to speak, in the time that they wanted to spend trying to understand what I'm saying, or, well, let's just dwell on that, because that's the simplest example. If they did that, they would say, hey, you could see them switch. You could see them starting to mentally switch, like, look, are you sure you're not just being annoying? They might not have convinced themselves of that, but they would literally just come to sort of an emotional end of their, trying to understand, and then emotionally switch, and then treat me as if, are you sure you're even being honest? Are you even actually asking a question? What the heck are you even saying anyway? Who are you to even ask this question? All this defensive stuff would come out, And I was fascinated by that. I was fascinated by that being a pattern. I would come out in different forms, talk to somebody that's, who knows, practically out on the streets, let's say, even. And anything from that to some college professor that thinks they have all their stuff together. And maybe they're actually a patient college professor. In some cases, they're not coming across like some impatient one that's trying to say, oh, I know everything, you should listen to me. They're not automatically pompous either, but they're actually trying, and there would still at some point be this switch where they would start to go, well, some of them would switch hard and fast, Some will switch a little bit slower and trying to be patient, but I can't anymore. And it's like they couldn't be honest about, you've run out, you've made me run out of my ability to try to understand what you're saying. Maybe I should find a way to redirect you to someone else, or to at least help you indirectly, while admitting that maybe I can't even understand what you're saying. Maybe I never really will, or at least it would take me too much time right now and I don't have that time, or whatever. Instead of acknowledging those practical limitations, it seemed to me like, people would just inevitably, when they got to the end of their curiosity, when they got to the end of their rope, when they got to the end of their patience, they would just turn it around on me. They would flip. They'd start to do all this defensive behavior. And I found it fascinating that was a pattern that held true despite the variations, like I said, and the pacing at which it would happen. It would happen. And I'm like, why? What are people doing? Right? So it's not simply unintellectual people, but again, educators. I grew up religiously, but some people would, pompously say, all religious people are dumb and everything, and like, without going into that, like, hey, okay, I mean, maybe the average religious person isn't super intellectual, but so even these pompous anti-religious people that would be not just I have reason to be non-religious, these are what they are, but actually like right away and hoity-toity and pompous about it. Even these people, which are some of the ones that you think are okay. So if they're so hoity-toity, surely they've done that because they're so intellectual that they have to be so against religion, then they know what they're talking about, right? No, they would come to the end of the rope as well, and they would just be, frustrated on some level, and be like, well, I'm trying to be patient at best. I'm trying to be patient with you, but dude, whatever. So it's this sort of self-centeredness that I was observing, right? And to kind of get to the point on it relatively quickly after all that, I found what I felt like was a fundamental flaw then in people's sense and practice of ethics, because ethics is put in practice by humanizing each other, right, and connecting to each other, and essentially being willing to ask, to answer other people's questions or hear them or grapple with them or whatever, right? And they were essentially, right, eventually dehumanizing me in whatever style, to whatever degree, at whatever pacing. And I found it, again, fascinating that was a common trait, that we all seem to have this common belief that it was okay to do that, to dehumanize someone when you have run out of your own curiosity and your own patience. It's okay to dehumanize that other person now, suddenly. What they're saying, what they're asking is not real. To me, that has shaped my sense of ethics and shaped my sense that the world is missing something ethically, fundamentally missing something ethically. And so I've gone on from that age to continue to study what people are doing wrong collectively. Why do we all seem to believe that it's okay to behave in the way that I just described? And it gave me sort of a sharpening over the years maybe of what ethics is, and it's sort of a practice and an intuition on what it is. But it really is, I think, at least illustrated by our ability to grapple with each other's questions and just be okay with whatever reaction we might have to those questions, and still understand that if it's an honest question, it's valuable and it's coming from who someone is, and that is the way that we can know that we are actually challenging ourselves to be an openly ethical person versus what seems to be this normal standard that we have developed. And I largely blame it on like modern civilization, but I mean, maybe there's some holes in that. Eventually someone will uncover how they can take it even deeper, but I think that it's a good beginning at least to blame a lot of that on our modern civilization and sort of explain some of the religious-like, spiritual-like stories and principles that we have developed in our recent hundreds and thousands of years in an attempt to explain why we feel cut off from our very natural, ethical, human nature. So anyway, long story short, I've that's what's led me to explore our common ethical weaknesses, I guess, and I think that it can be really kind of summed up in this common way through what I've just illustrated in my own story, and what inspired me to, continue to ask questions. Because Because frankly, I mean, if you didn't pick that up, or if you didn't intuit this already, or if you didn't just naturally conclude this, it hurt. It hurt going through that. It hurt watching people do that to me, just because I'm weird enough to ask questions that overwhelm pretty much everybody. That I can't have. It's like as if the message is that I can't have the right, but I can't have the privilege, what was being treated like a privilege in their view, of being treated like an honest human, and given the benefit of the doubt that I'm just speaking what's honestly in my heart, you know, and being accepted for that. So it's tough seeing that so much, seeing that because I was so weird and so able to ask questions that other people couldn't ask, couldn't even understand. It kind of made them react in these ways, and it revealed this sort of weakness that we all seem to carry around. And so of course I challenged that in my own self, and I continue to do that, but I also explore, like, how are we like this? How did we get like this? And that's what's led me to do what I've done so far. I think that's all I have to share. So just again framed around my story, but there's sort of an ethical principle in there, or at least a background, and you can see where I'm coming from. So I think that's it. Thanks.